nice to have you here. Welcome. So I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Fran Huntoon, and I'm do work with middle schools I ran the middle school cohort with Bob Laird for all learners. I'm also working with a couple different school districts, St. Johnsbury and then Orange East Supervisory Union, on this, trying to help them develop the capacity for their teachers to really meet the needs of all learners. So working on some coaching and I don't know, PD with the teachers. Sorry, I sound so vague. It's not really vague. It's really pretty focused. When I'm not doing that, I'm an instructor and mentor at the Vermont Mathematics Initiative. And I also am a facilitator for OGAP, the Ongoing Assessment Project, and got a chance to be an author on their most recent book on ratios and proportional reasoning. And I also work with TJ for the state on multi-tiered systems of support. We've been running ed camps and such for a number of years, supporting schools. So, and then I just work with schools too on top of that. So a little bit of everything. And I decided to talk about the rights of the learner today because I was reading about it and did some work this summer around equity with Deborah Ball from the University of Michigan. And so got really thinking about the rights of the learner. And I really think more about that and what it means, the implications for teachers. And a lot of it dovetails so nicely to Bob's conversation, Bob's keynote address today, which I thought was wonderful. First of all, just these are our agreements that we have for all learners when we're meeting together. Just share the air. If you're a talker, try to listen. If you're a listener, try to talk. Honor private think time. Be fully present and engaged. Take care of yourself. If you can keep your video on, that's fine. If you can't, that's not an issue. Feel free to put things in the chat box. That's a nice way to participate without having to have video on. And appreciate that learning is a process and not an event. So we're going to assume positive intentions from everybody and embrace struggle and challenge. Okay, so I have a little math warm up because if you know me, which some of you do, you know that I can't not do a little bit of math. So my question is, and I'd like you to private think time first, which is longer, the red line or the dotted line? And then what I'd like you to do, don't hit enter. I'd like you to type your response in the chat box, but don't hit enter yet. Okay, when you're ready, go ahead and hit enter. Nice. So TJ, nice comment that you writing that you originally thought one was longer than the other, but then you thought they were the same, and it's making you think deeper about it. Hector gives a nice description of rearranging the black lines to create the rectangle. Dana Cummings, a nice description of the dotted line as the red line bent back and forth. Oh, great. Dana Johnson. Yeah, I should have found a way to do it better for you. Yeah, they are equal with moving back and forth. Yeah, it's a great visual and a nice one to use with students because it's counterintuitive to them that they are the same length. Initially, they especially think that the dotted line is longer because it appears to be going further when, as Hector mentioned, you can rearrange those lines and create the rectangle from it. Nice. So that was just our little warm up here. Okay. Let's see. All right, so our focus for today is what are the rights of the learner? What role do they play in promoting equity in the classroom? And then how can we use them to create classrooms where students feel safe and have their ideas respected? The rights of a learner, when I first read about them and learned about them, were from some work I got to get by a teacher named Olga Torres, who is a bilingual elementary teacher and teacher educator out in Arizona. And she noticed that her third graders were having difficulty participating in math class. And so she developed these rights of a learner as a way to help her students feel more comfortable. And I think that many of you probably, well, there aren't many of you here, but those of you who are here probably use something similar in your class about sometimes their norms, sometimes their expectations. I just was interested in this idea of a right as being something that students had, and how would we share them with students, and then what are the implications. And I'm happy to share this slideshow, by the way, with everyone. So the first one she had was the right to be confused. The second was the right to claim you've made a mistake and revise your thinking, to speak, listen, and be heard, and to write, do, and represent what makes sense to you. So those were the original lists she came up with. And then in a series of articles in a publication called Democracy in Education, certain educators responded to this. And they came up with two other ones. So the two other ones that they added in were, it's like getting it to, were, one was, and you won't be to anyone's surprise that to know where I am in my learning, where I should be, and ways to close the gap, came from Joe Bowler and responding to it. And then the last one was to feel safe and have one's ideas respected. And I would argue in a way, or maybe not argue, but I would suggest in a way that that's an overarching right that we look for every student to have in every single class in school, right? This idea that you're going to feel safe and have your ideas respected is huge. So what I'd like to do is kind of go through these rights and do some activities around them and have you think about them and go from there. If you're up for it. Well, it doesn't matter if you're up for it. That's what I'm doing. So you're along for the ride. So the first one I want to talk about is, oh, come on. All right. I never, it's not never. I rarely present this way. I usually just give you the slideshow and we go through the slides. So I'm trying to be, do something good. So, or try it this way. So I'm in the chat box right now. I've put a little Padlet. So if you click on that, it takes you to a screen, and I'd like you to go ahead and pop in on a post-it or comment about why is being confused a good thing? If one of the rights is the right to be confused, why is being confused a good thing? Great, and if there's someone's comment that you really like, you can add a comment to theirs as well. Nice. Yeah, the metacognition, that's huge, being confused. Evidence of engagement and struggle. I like the no confusion is no path to learning something. Struggling with multiple thoughts, and confusion often leads to perseverance. Absolutely. That whole idea of disequilibrium is when we're most open to learning. So I could stop my presentation now because you've already hit all the high points that we're going to get to, but I'm going to keep going. Yeah, absolutely. So this idea of, I wanted to unpack this a little bit more, and I wanted to do, since there are just this is Fran counting, 7 of you. I wanted to do 2 breakout rooms, and what I'm going to do is give you, so can I just say that when we first were planning for this conference, there were 182 people registered. So I made a lot of breakout rooms because who knew how many people would come. But so I'll just do it by breakout room. And what I did was I created a Jamboard, and I'll put the link to the Jamboard is in the chat box. And what I'd like to do is I'll put you into 2 breakout rooms for about 12 minutes. And these are the questions, they're on the Jamboard that I'd like you to respond to. This idea of what are some things that students say or do when they're confused? What are some things that teachers can say or do to acknowledge student confusion? And what is it that we sometimes do as teachers that inhibits students embracing confusion? Does someone from the other room just want to share a couple tidbits, and then someone from our room share a couple things that in particular jumped out? Dana Cummings had a nice one that he shared where he said that sometimes we embrace confusion when we, not in a good way necessarily, when we suggest that everybody understands that something is right or how to do something, that we don't embrace it in a good way. But we also talked about needing a lot of wait time when students are confused. Like that's a pretty clear thing we need to have, is waiting to allow that confusion to bubble up or students to be able to acknowledge it. Someone from the other group want to just share 1 or 2 things?
Fran, I'm just going to share my screen because I took notes for everyone. So, and then someone can talk to it.
Okay, great. Or we could just look at it at least.
Yeah, I think I'll just mention in that last column, that was kind of an interesting conversation about, not that we want to discourage them being confused, but as teachers, we want to help them, and we don't like it when they're confused and feeling frustrated. So we jump too quickly into getting or helping them, or we're, especially, if you're stuck in a 45-minute like block of time, we feel like, oh, we don't have time to let them stay confused. And we then just like want to jump and give them, the correct answer, or we just feel that pressure that we don't allow the kids to sit and be confused as long as they should be.
Yeah, nice, Amy. We had a similar kind of conversation in our room about time sometimes being an issue. All right, we should be back in it. So nice job on talking about the right to be confused. I wanted to share with you, this was a recent interaction I actually had with a student where this was the problem the student was solving. And the class had first discussed the problem without the question and talked about what was happening. And then the student had, they were added the question on. And so the students were answering the question. And this is what the student had written, 47 minus 20 equals 23. And I asked the student, that's me, can you tell me what you did? And I was writing down what the student said. I know 47 is 40 and 7. So I did 40 minus 20. Then I took 7 from 30, and that's 23. So it's 23. So I did what anyone might or might not do. I said, can you explain that to me again? Because I'm not sure what's happening. And the student said, I did 40 minus 20 is 20. Then I took 7 from 30, and it's 23. And so I was really stymied at that point in time because the student, and at that point, the student started to have that look of confusion. You know, that look kids get where they start to furrow their brow and start to kind of look at what they did and they're trying to figure it out. And so I let it sit for a minute, and then I was going to ask you for next steps, but I'm just going to tell you what I did was I had the student, I said, can you get out the base 10 blocks and show this to me? And the student grabbed out 47 with base 10 blocks and removed 20 and then went, oh, and said it's 27. So it was, to me, it was that confusion around someone had probably talked to the kid at some point in time about regrouping or something, where the student had some idea that we take 10 from 40 and we have 30. I don't really know. But so it was an interesting to see that moment of confusion, but I wouldn't have seen it if I didn't ask, what did you do? Or how did you solve that? So that's another way we can think about getting at the heart of confusion. And then this quote, which is from actually a person who's a high school math teacher. And I'd just like you to read this for a minute. And I'd like you to put in the chat box anything from this quote that sort of resonates with you. So this idea, I thought that, yeah, they're not confused, reconciling their ideas with evidence in front of them. I think this idea of, this is where perseverance comes in, is this idea that you're trying to reconcile what you already knew with what you're learning now and trying to put those ideas together. We can watch that in kids all the time. The next right I want to talk about is this idea of the right to claim a mistake and revise your thinking. And I decided not to do a lot with this one because I feel like as in this day and age, we've all been exposed to the idea of a growth mindset and the idea that mistakes grow your brain. Has everyone seen U Cubed in some way or another and familiar with Joe Bowler's work? If you're not, you definitely should be. And Rochelle Gutierrez and I forget the other woman's name, did this idea of, we want to move from this idea of mistake and misconception because it resides in this space of incorrectness, and think instead about what students know. I think that links nicely to what Bob was saying earlier today. This idea of what do you need in order to revise your thinking, and you need sort of time and space to talk and discuss, and that we really have to see mistakes as one of the best assets we have because they really give us a window into what students are thinking. This idea of the right to claim a mistake, I've really been thinking hard about this. And I know that Joe Bowler's research is, the research that she cites suggests that even when you make a mistake, synapses fire in your brain. In order to allow students, and I think Hector, you were talking earlier about your action research you did on talking about mistakes and stuff with your students. I think we have to give them time to claim the mistake and revise their thinking. So it's not us telling them you made a mistake, but allowing them to discover they made a mistake. Like that's a big thing, I think, because I haven't read Brene Brown's work on shame and such. I only listen to her podcast. I don't know if anyone knows who she is, but she does a lot of work with shame and such. And I think that when we tell kids they made a mistake, that's, it's harder to internalize. And I know from a personal perspective, it's harder. It's much easier when I can say I made a mistake and figure out how to change it. So just this idea that we want to let students claim the mistake. I think that's about all I wanted to say on that one. So then I'll move on to the right to speak, listen, and be heard. And this one is big. And I was just thinking about that difference between hearing and listening. And this idea that hearing is the reception of sound, but listening is the reception of thoughts. And listening is primarily an activity of the mind. And I was reading one thing that really helped me think about, we don't want to so much tell students who to listen to, but we want to teach them what to listen for, right? Because I can tell you to listen to TJ, but I also want to teach you what to listen for. And so now I have to make an executive decision. And I had I'm gonna have you do two things. The first is I have another Padlet, and I'm gonna put this in. This is a Padlet, and what I would like you to respond to is I want you to put in some talk moves that a teacher might use to encourage students to listen and ask questions. So if you can jump into that Padlet.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
I think I understand what is meant by talk moves, but I've never had it like actually defined for me. So could somebody clarify the common understanding of what that means?
Has someone else heard that term before? Hector, what does it mean to you? I'll put you on the spot because I can.
Yeah, that's fine. I always just thought it was just like what I am saying to the kids to try to get them, or to the students to try to get them to, well, in this case, to talk to each other and listen to each other and ask questions. But it's the words that come out of my mouth that move the conversation along.
Or
I
any,
wonder,
yeah, go ahead, TJ.
I just wonder if the term like facilitation moves, you know, like discourse or discussion facilitation moves might be a better way to describe it, if that helps, Dana.
So if we could go to the Padlet and have, oh yeah, somebody's already started. Nice. I think a lot of them are spoken, but sometimes we do things that are not spoken, but which are actually physical actions we do. Nice move I saw a presenter do once was the presenter had a visual up and a pattern up, and we had to talk about it, how someone shared how they saw it, and the presenter didn't write anything down about how the person saw it, but asked someone else to revoice it. So before there was a visual, like forced us to have listened to what the person was saying. I thought that was interesting. At the same point in time, I would suggest that the more often we can have a visual in front of students while they're talking, it's really important. Nice. A lot of can you add to? How would you explain to someone what you understand, to someone unfamiliar? Great. Where do you see this? Encourage a model. What's the same? What's different? Give feedback to someone. And it takes a long time to develop that culture in your classroom of students getting comfortable doing that. Because ultimately they can then ask questions themselves, but that takes a long time to develop. Man, you guys are cranking them out. Anyone in here, someone see something that they hadn't seen before that they're thinking about?
I just love the one, Fran, where someone said they sit down, because that whole like height thing, you know, either crouching or sitting down. And I've done that or heard of that, but I was glad to be reminded of it.
Yeah, I worked with a kindergarten teacher once where I told her the students were taking turns talking. You know, they all had a turn and they were sort of passing the turn to other students. And I looked at her and I said, don't make eye contact with the student. Because when you make eye contact, all they'll do is look at you. So it was really hard, but she would just kind of, you know, turn her eyes away a little bit. And it was really interesting to watch the student then try and catch the eyes of other students. So that idea of who's the focal point of attention. Nice. So I was going to have you watch a clip of a second grade teacher, but I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to hold off on that. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is put you in groups, and what I'd like you to do, I put the questions on the pieces of student work in the Jamboard, so you ought to be able to see it. And I'm going to give you, I'll do another 12 minutes to go ahead and look at the student work and see what does the student appear to understand and what makes sense to the student. Okay, is everybody okay with that? All right. I think this gets at that heart of, formative assessment and thinking about that. But this idea that students have the right to write, represent, and do what makes sense to you, that's what we're seeing in that student work, is they're writing, representing, and doing what makes sense to them. And it's up to us as a teacher to be able to interpret and understand what they're doing. Do you have any final comments about the student work questions or comments you want to make?
Just in our group, I think it was Amy, but it could have been Dana. I was sharing my screen, so I couldn't see who was talking. But someone was just talking about how those questions that you put there, Fran, with each piece of student work was such a great way to frame looking at student work. Whereas often classroom teachers or educators in general tend to kind of just quickly go to the focus of like, they got it wrong, or they don't know what they're doing, or they can't do anything here. Okay, thanks, it was Dana. So really just helping to frame that when working and looking at student work.
Absolutely. We want to keep that very much in the mix of thinking about what is it about the student appears to understand or make sense of. So then this leads right naturally into that, the one that was added about the right to know where I am in my learning, where I should be, and ways to close the gap. And I was thinking about, how do students know where they are in their learning? And one way they know is that when we share learning intentions or learning goals with students, and that's probably the most basic way, but then are students setting goals for their own work as well? And how are they monitoring that? How do they know where they should be? And how do they know ways to close the gap? And what I was thinking about, and Bob, it's nice to see you here, linking back to formative assessment. So I was reading through this one definition of formative assessment. I know there are a number of them. This is from the chief the CCSSO school state officers or whatever came up with a revised definition. And you can read Dylan Williams' definition as well. But what really stuck out to me in this one is the idea of that effective use of the formative assessment process requires students and teachers to integrate and embed the following practices in a collaborative and respectful classroom environment. And so I was thinking about that idea of, as formative assessment or formative instruction, however you'd like to refer to it, becomes more the norm of how we teach, I think what's happened is we've begun to build the capacity of teachers to use formative assessment. The place where we're still, I think, not really sure is how do we get students to use it? How do we create a system where students are using the formative assessment and using that as a way to inform and drive their learning? And I don't have the answer for you on that, but I think about it a lot, is how can we get students to be thinking about that and to feel like they have some ownership in it? And think that idea of where are they headed, do they even know, and can they begin to see how to get there? And that's not an easy one to answer. And then the last one that I come back to is that first one we talked about, which is the right to feel safe and have one's ideas respected, which is not just about math class, but which is a overarching thing that we would like kids, all students, to have in the school. And I just wanted you to take a moment and read these two quotes. These, by the way, are both from the book Catalyzing Change, that came out by NCTM, a recent publication. And just this idea that empowering students, that they become the mathematical authorities on the mathematics in the room, that we have to create a safe space so children can be curious, take risks, and ask questions. We want to have them be the owners of the mathematical thinking and mathematical meaning. And I think that when we create a place where students feel safe and have their ideas respected, that we have that opportunity to do that. Students have that opportunity. So I'm just going to come back to, again, the rights of the learner, all 6 of them. And I'm not suggesting put them up in your classroom. I think they're I've certainly started using them in my teaching as a way to encourage people to be thinking about things. And just this idea that we want stealing Alvin for our equity course. Thank you, TJ. That just the implication, if this is what we want for students, what do we need to be doing as teachers to ensure that students have the opportunity to engage in that way? Yeah, the Learner's Bill of Rights, Dano, not just we're asking, we demand. All right, I just have to show you, I will share I'll put my presentation up on the ALN website. These are my resources that I used.